Welcome to the MF, that is the masculine feminine quadrant, where we'll be breaking down distinctions and exploring the four corners of the two dual forces of masculine and feminine creation. Join us for some deeply reflective and penetrating conversation and an exchange of energies to open your body, your mind, and your being.
Already.
Ready. Okay, let's go. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome in, and welcome to this MF quadrant. Today, our subject is freedom and belonging. So, as always, we've got two poles and exploring those both sides and everything that's in between. So we're thinking about belonging, this sense of security, embracing relationships or embracing relational dynamics. And then on the other side, we've got freedom, which is less about relationships, more about adventure, more about freedom. And we just thought we'd start with a nice little quote. So I think this is quite a popular quote. I think most of us know this, but I believe it's the Dalai Lama. It might be Thich Nhat Hanh, but anyway.
Debatably.
So the quote is, "Give the ones you love wings to fly, roots to come back, and reasons to stay."
So beautiful.
And this is a nice balance, right? And everything that we talk about on this show is really about balance and finding that middle ground. And so we're just going to explore everything around this concept of freedom and belonging. We kind of, I did kind of inspired a little bit by Gabor Mate and his thoughts about authenticity and connection, and that sometimes there's a tension between those two, and that's something that we learn in early childhood when we're learning to please our caregivers, or we get rewarded with love when we do certain things, or we don't get rewarded when we don't do certain things, etc., etc. And this kind of shapes our idea of how we express ourselves. And then also influenced somewhat by Esther Perel, who talks about generally that most people fall into one of those two categories, either a real desire for belonging and security and relationship, and others who kind of fall into kind of more wanting their space. And she describes it, she says, one person in a relationship is more afraid of losing the other person, and the other person is more afraid of losing themselves. So that was quite a nice analogy. So it's kind of like, so for the one that enjoys more freedom, the relationship can feel smothering, it can feel too contained, it can feel, and for the one who wants more relationship, there maybe, and it kind of maps on to attachment styles, anxious, avoidant, etc. But we're going to break that all down, because as you know, that's how we roll here. We're going to break it all down and dive in. So I forgot to introduce ourselves. So obviously you're here with me, Shaka, and the lovely Max. And
as per usual.
So let's just dive in. I mean, let's just dive right in with our first question. And I'm going to just fire this at you now. Do you feel it's possible to be authentic and loved at the same time?
Simply said, yes. I think so I feel like we kind of brought this first question in because, well, for me, I felt like it was a good first step in, because like you said, we all want that authenticity, right? And we all have this sense of being able to express ourselves comfortably. And I think ultimately that's what love is. It's a free forming way of expression. And as much as you brought this form around, like, we're going to get into attachment styles later, and the theories of Gabor Mate and Esther Perel and things like this. You know me, I'm a lone ranger, and I love theory. I'm an academic. I love all that stuff, but I'm always the person in class like, but what about this? So I've come to learn, just being on the ways of academia, and listening to theories and listening to protocols and doing all these things. I like to go out into the world and like really actually apply and get experiential data, really. And it's not that I take my life as like being analytical and I just go through that, but I think this has also been my path and my journey of authenticity. This is me authentically, but also I think it's this essence of self-love. Like for me, that's a reflection of self-love, to be able to express authentically your true self, not this facade, like how we spoke about when you have this this council of your self, your shadow, your anima and animus, things that we've spoken up about before, whether you want to just say, oh, I'm completely water, and I attach and I identify with my air sign, or I'm mutable, or I'm a cardinal, or I'm whatever identity that we kind of like adhere to. For me, in my process of going through self-love, just like personally, I believe, and this is something that I, for lack of a better term, preach to like my guy friends and like the males that I'm around, is like, know yourself, like that's a key principle in life, is like to know thyself. And really for me, that's what authenticity was, because looking at all those identities that were there, and less about what we spoke about cognitively and emotionally and esoterically, but coming down to just, let's ground all of it in together. And like, I'm this person, like this is me right here, like how can I show up authentically? And I think we put ourselves we put ourselves into a lot of pressured situations and experiences to receive that love. And I think that's the part of these like deep-seated needs for freedom and also belonging, because this natural authentic self wants to belong, and this natural authentic self also wants to, polarly wise, if that's even like a thing, polarly wise, but just on the other side of that, it has that expression of the freedom, so it's like, where do I belong, and then also how do I express that freedom? But for me, the balance was looking at them simultaneously. And this is a lens that I take within my life, is to look at things through simultaneous contrast. Is like, I'm not just looking for freedom, and I'm not just looking for belonging. It's like, what is in the middle? And if I keep directed in the middle, and I'm embodying this self-love, and I believe that we first need to find that first. So I feel that it's possible, but if we were to change that question to, if we feel that it's probable to be authentic and loved at the same time, I don't think most of us experience that, because of all of those identity issues that we have, and we haven't unraveled those layers to get to that point where we love ourselves enough to recognize our authenticity, and then recognize the love that is coming in there. Because then with that, we're allowing ourselves to be given the sense of belonging, whilst we're also still expressing freedom. So for me, that has made it like possible. You see that, and to show up authentically. And then it's like the action, like how do you do that in your own person,
So what you're saying is that sense of belonging is coming from essentially like love from source, not from the relational space, essentially.
I don't necessarily think that it's coming from that source. I believe that is an essence of that source. Because like, like Gabor, stated before, and, these are all these things around the attachment styles is like why we attach to another person, because we always have this need for something outside of us rather than finding it inside of us. And it's not to say, oh, find self-love and like be with yourself and blah blah blah. It's like, no, you know. And I mean, especially just expressing as a man, right? Like, for example, we have a lot of guys nowadays that there's this mechanism that comes through that, right? And it is about freedom mainly. Like for us, I personally believe that there is this sense that we're not necessarily, like, we can't necessarily be free. And I know that this is, you know, people say it is a patriarchal world, and it damn sure is, but there's also a level of imprisonment that comes with that leading, you know, especially when, you know, that weight is on you, because it's like, oh, like, you're a man, like, you're the reason, you know. And even if you're not, even if you're upstanding guy and all these different things. So when I think at our core, when we first came into this world and we're just pure essence and pure spirit, there is that polar need of freedom and belonging. But how can we encapsulate them both to express, you know? So I don't necessarily believe that it's coming from that. I believe that it is just in itself, in essence, of what is. And it's not until we find out what is here, like for our own individual sake, that we can actually recognize it and then actually become the author of our life. And, you know, and that's the activity of like being the author, is authenticity, you know. And, you know, me, I love the etymology and everything behind it. But yeah, I feel like it stems, like it's rooted within it, but not necessarily coming from it, you know.
Yeah. And I guess I would say, and I'm wondering, I don't know if this is what Esther Perel would say, but it's something coming through now where I'm thinking, I mean, probably most of us are probably a bit of both. I mean, it's probably really incredibly rare to find people who are just sitting in one camp or the other, but to some extent we probably like are on that spectrum. But there's something that happens in the relational space when one really holds that strong position, that it almost puts the other person in that other position. It's almost like that's a dynamic that ends up showing up in the relational space. So regardless of whether you have found that balance within, depending on, you know, in a relationship context, if someone's holding a more let's say leaning towards wanting more freedom, or one's leaning towards wanting more closeness, then like that can shift another person's energy into the opposite.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I think that's, I mean, I really believe that happens a lot. And I think that is the reason why like men feel it, and it's so hard. It's not going to say harder. Say it's a little bit more challenging for men to actually show up authentic, because there's so much insecurity that's placed into women at those times, so that when we are in this relational space, that dynamic starts to happen because there's an imbalance. And I'm not saying like, oh, it's all like women's fault, you guys are imbalanced. Well, no, because it's most likely also the other side. But a lot of the times men take that on because this is the patriarchal world, you know. And I'm just looking at this from a male's aspect, but objectively speaking, if you are balanced and I am balanced, then we step into this relational space balanced. So there is no, oh, I'm leaning more towards this, so now you have this, and then that's, you just create that. You step in already with the preconceived notion that this is the narrative that we're going to play out. You're insecure attachment. Oh, okay, wow, like I'm actually experiencing secure attachment, blah blah blah, you know. And it's like, now we're that thing, when it's like, yo, just stay with yourself long enough, peel, do the work, take the walk, figure out, okay, this is my authenticity, and tether that down, you know. Like that's something that I express into, you know, like my people that are close, especially men, and then especially like, you know, within the circles and within the spaces that, you know, men are around, you know. Because it's like, if you don't tether down to that center, then are you even able to step into the world and show up authentically, you know? Because you don't even know what authenticity is. You don't know what your authentic truth is. So if you haven't found that, you step into the relational space, and then you start shifting the energy of that person, and you create the polarized to what you actually need, because you can't give it to yourself.
Well, I mean, I kind of would argue that like relationally that's happening at both sides. I mean, I think that's the relationships, is that I don't think it is just one person. It's like, it's a relational dynamic. So there's a conversation, but I think that yeah, I think there's something in what you were saying. Like, I actually think it's really important to just point out to the audience that, like, yeah, like, I think we get caught up in this pop psychology of these labels of like, I am this, or I'm this, or I'm that. I think you can observe your patterns and your like previous, you know, your patterns of behavior in previous relationships. And I think this stuff is useful to kind of map out and have a, you know, greater understanding. But I think we have to say that you can change it. Like, attachment style isn't a fixed thing. It isn't like, oh,
Right.
I'm this and that is that. Actually, that's kind of what we're talking about, is that actually depending on, you know, the kind of relationships that you're having can actually sway it one way or another, depending generally. So it's quite difficult. And definitely something that can be healed, and not everyone has an insecure attachment, obviously.
Yeah, I think that the labels are good to like identify, you know, but it's also like identify in a sense of like, oh, that's it over there. I'm not identifying. Like, it's not me. I see it over there. I see that I do those things, but stop doing them, you know? It's like, what's the point of looking at something and then being like, oh, that's me. That's what I am. This is, you know? And then you stay and you go, oh, okay, I'm gonna take that. I'm gonna put down my Tinder profile, my Bumble profile, and that's what I am. That's what I identify as. And it's like, this is a more deep-seated root that is at the cause of all of this. Is people have identity issues, and when you have an identity issue, then you can't show up authentic, and then if you can't show up authentic, how can you actually truly recognize that you're being loved, you know, at the same time? I personally believe. But before we get way too far off, do you feel that it's possible to be authentic and loved at the same time?
I mean, like you, absolutely.
Oh, wait, hold on. Because I feel like you agree on this. I want to shift it a little bit. Have you ever been authentic and loved at the same time?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have. Absolutely.
On to the next question then. No, I'm just kidding. So what was that like?
That relationship is still in existence. I'm still in.
Is it with me? I love you. You're loved here. And I hope you're showing up authentically.
Oh no, I feel it. I feel the love. And absolutely.
This is not like just a secure attachment that you have.
I'm just trying to get on your good side.
Right.
No.
So in that space, you feel like it was I guess like how did that dynamic play out for you, just being like the intuitive that you are and doing all the work that you do, and just being the pure essence of love that you are? How did you like recognize that?
So I have to say, I mean, this isn't a friendship, and this is with a girlfriend, and very, very good friend. And I feel like, actually, now you're saying that, now you're asking me that, I feel like there's something about being seen, because there's something about someone seeing parts of you and saying, hey, it's safe for you to bring all of those parts to this space. And then like slowly over time, I think I've talked a lot about you know, this very, very good friendship, and yeah, just a very, very special, incredible friend, and woman.
Does she get a shout out or something?
She does get a shout out, Riri.
Okay, Riri,
I mentioned her in my last podcast. She watched the last one and she was like, were you talking about me? You should have sent that voice note, that ranty voice note. She was like, never ever, don't ever never send your ranty voice note. And I was like, no.
There you go. You're like, no, I couldn't give you that 30 minutes of all of me.
But yeah, no, I feel like there's something about, like, I feel like there's times when, like, if we're talking specifically about this relationship, and shout out to Riri. But yeah, no, I think that there's times when she's seen into me and drawn and invited those parts of me in. And I think they were parts that sometimes maybe I've been less aware of. And so this is why I always say relationships are so informative. Like, we learn so much about ourselves in relationship through being witnessed. So I would definitely say that. And I think, like, I mean, I agree with you, everything that you said. I think, like, ultimately I say yes to this question. Absolutely. Can you be authentic and loved at the same time? Absolutely. Is it challenging? Yes, it is. And I think we've spoken about this, and I don't know, and I feel like, I don't know, the way that you responded last time we kind of spoke about projection, you kind of had a real strong, like, yes, I really do know that. Because what happens is, especially when, like, and I think both of us have quite, like, strong presence and, like, personalities. So I think people tend to, like, read you straight away. They're like, okay, cool, I know I know who you are. And then what happens is you end up in these relationships where you only really get a chance to, like, express, like, aspects of self. Like, if you think about a whole self, and I definitely know that in relationships where I've been cut up into sections, where I'm like, oh no, I like this bit, but I don't like that bit, leave that one behind. Oh, I like this bit, but I don't like that bit, leave that. And then you have to make a choice, where, do you forego connection, and say, okay, well, all right, I'll just slide myself into this section for this person in order to stay in connection, or which is what I've more tended to do, which is just, like, break off the chains, and I'm like, no, I'm going to be all of myself. And but so I think it's hard, because I think in relationships we have these projections. Ultimately, we see people and we don't necessarily see them. We see them as we see ourselves to some extent, right? And then we put that onto them without even realizing. And then we have then expectations of them, of how they're supposed to show up in the relational space. And I think that makes things complicated, because that dynamic is like, you're showing up as in a certain type of way because of how someone sees you, and someone's drawing those aspects of you out, and then vice versa. That's happening both ways. So I think when we talk about authenticity, I think it's really challenging to talk about authenticity like as if to say we live on islands, because we don't. We live in relationship all the time. And so, well, we do. And, like, don't get me wrong, I hear you when you say, like,
I live on an island. I live on a mountain right now.
I definitely know you spoke to people today, though. I definitely know you've had conversations.
Oh
with
yeah,
them.
absolutely, of course.
So, and maybe, like, obviously, like, yeah, the deeper the connection, obviously, that I think there's more of a charge, and there's kind of more, this shows up, I think, more profoundly, I suppose.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, I feel like I have to caveat some of that, because I would just say, as a male, like, I don't feel like I necessarily, I don't necessarily experience that, like, showing up in relationships. I feel like it's quite the opposite. I show up so authentic that the other person places those expectations on me. And when I'm able to see, like, I'm not a person, I know you may identify with that as a projector of your human design, but I'm a generator. And also, like, I know for me is, like, in my spirit, because I've done that work and I've taken off those layers. And, I used to have those like illusions and those veils that were over, and looking at people through lenses and being like, you're just like me. You're just, if you're with me, like, you're going to be just like me. You have the same capacity. You think like this. And it's like, no, you can't do that. And when I stepped away from, like, especially romantic relationships, it was this deep inner, like, again, like, the unpeeling and being like, no, like, I can't go back out there and keep doing those things. Like, for me, it was this deep, like, no, you need to figure out what's that and then go from there. So it was like, now when I show up in these spaces, I'm like, yo, like this is me. Like you're gonna get this and that's it. If you can't accept this, then I got nothing else for you because this is me. Like this is the way that I love.
But then would you say that there's like, because that feels very, because, you know, within relationships, we grow, right? We evolve, we change, we adapt, we move. Like there is movement in relationships. Like if we're just, like if we enter in relationships and we're like, this is who I am, and that is it, and it's immovable, then really we're not really in I would argue we're not necessarily in relationship.
Well, again, this is not an argument. I was coming to that in a sense of I'm growing, but my authenticity is still the same. This is who I am, and I'm showing up as me. And if you are unable in the space or in the time to see me for that and to give me grace and to actually love me and forgive me in that moment in time as I am growing, then you don't deserve that. So it's less of I'm showing up and this is me and I'm rigid and this is who I am. No, it's this is me. This is what you get. This is the way that I love. This is the way that I receive. And I'm speaking about that in a sense of the gestures and the actions that I do, whether if it's communication, whether if it's, you know, through the way that I love, through the way that I do things, through the way that I envision, like a lot of different ways of how you can express your authenticity, because that's the part of like feeding and nurturing that deep set sense of freedom, you know? And just for example, like as a Black man growing up in America, it's like there's not a lot of freedom, you know? And freedom is a stigma that a lot of not just men, but Black men have, you know? And then there's also the thing of being like a biracial man in my neighborhood, you know, it's like, where do I belong? Where do I fit in? So yeah, there's 100% adaptability. I'm a Pisces, I'm a mutable sign. Like I move all in and all out. So that is in my nature as well. So it's like taking these little bits of the unpeeling as you're finding that authenticity, but also peeling back the petal, looking at it for its beauty and distilling that, and then saying like, okay, like I'm not choosing these parts, but I accept and receive that essence, so that when you get to that center, you have this realization of the authenticity is that process, you know, and then you are granted freedom, you know, and then you allow yourself or give yourself that permission to belong in whatever space that you're in, you know, and that's just the position that I've taken. And the, let's say, I don't even want to say process, but the journey that I've gone in through, you know, through relationships, rather than having expectations to be put on somebody else, because I think that that's unfair. Because then that comes down to like around the second question that we have is about dependence and reliance, right? And it's like, because if I'm in this relationship, and if I'm not showing up, or I'm not feeling like I can be authentic, or I have to move and adapt and change because of the relationship, then you're being fooled. You're telling yourself a lie. Either that person is lying to you and they're putting up a facade that you're believing, or you're putting up a facade telling yourself that this is your authentic self when it's really not. And then you're just going through these lessons and you're going through these patterns to learn, because then you start to be dependent on this person. And then when you're dependent on them, then you have that insecure attachment, or you have that reliance where the person is relying on you, and then you have that secure attachment. So now you're just facilitating this other pattern of these other labels, rather than just being authentically yourself. And I know you might disagree with that, but
I mean,
that's where I think we would have to come to what the difference between dependence and reliance is when it comes to yourself and it comes to the others.
And other. I mean, I guess when you say that, I guess I'm there's two things that come to mind. Well, the first thing that comes straight to mind is that podcast that I watched the other day on the Gottmans, on the Diary of a CEO. And they were talking about relationship. I think they've been married for like, I don't know,
36 years.
36 years. Yeah, 36 years.
Not
right?
a long time, actually.
It's not a long, like, yeah, I hear you in the great scheme of things. So it's actually still, but it's still quite a long time. I think it's respectable. And plus, I mean, I've heard we mustn't look at longevity of a relationship and like that's the test. But they looked very happy, to be honest. They looked very happily married. And I guess when I think about when these concepts of dependence and reliance, and I'm thinking, Well, in that situation, I think there would be a lot of reliance and a lot of dependence actually between them. I mean, I
In what
don't
situation?
in their marriage, like looking at them as a couple, they do so much together. And I'm just using that as an example in the sense that like we have, and I think there was another podcast I was listening to the other day, like this difference between the idea of codependence and interdependence. Because I think what happens is like, for example, especially with us, so we've grown up in these like neoliberal societies that have like essentially valorized individualism to a point where we don't really know what the difference is, because we are all about like freedom of self. I'm going to express myself how I want to. It's all about, you know, the individual and like valorizing the individual. That somewhat like, and I get that that's been like a kind of almost a kind of reaction against the kind of intermingling that's happened when like communities are too tight and then no one gets any freedom, but everyone sees their identity within the group. And then so it just makes me think, oh yeah, but how is it possible to have these like long-term relationships and not to some extent feel reliance and dependence upon another? I don't even know what that would look like. I guess that's kind of how I feel it, because I hear you, because I think that there is something, you know, when we talk about like this nuance, right? Like dependence, all right, when there's a kind of like foregoing of self in order to bond with another. Yes, that's unhealthy, right? But there is also two healthy people coming together and having a reliance and dependence on each other. And that's and in a marriage, for example, long-term marriage, that seems to me quite normal. And that feels like, yeah, like normal. So I guess that's where like my nuance on that is. It's not necessarily a negative thing, because I imagine that, yeah, when looking at that couple,
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, yeah, I would imagine there's a lot of dependence there.
And I guess that's where we would ask the question of what the difference between the two are.
Mm.
Because it's like, you could also ask them like, hey, what's your, attachment styles? Did they speak about their own attachment styles? Probably not, because we're speaking about us in this, like you said, neoliberal kind of generation that we're in, and you have all these labels. You're talking about a couple that has been studying love for over 60 years, and then they've been married for 36 years. So they're in this field that are speaking of these things that are dissolved of those labels, kind of exactly like what we were saying, is like finding your balance and finding that authenticity. So they've found that for themselves, which is why you can show up in this relational space in that sense. You know what I mean? So there is that portion of like, okay, I know what healthy dependence is. I'm thinking in my mind or in my heart, like, yeah, I can depend on this person. And it puts you in a state rather than like, oh, I'm depending on this person because I have an insecure attachment. Or the level of reliance, like, oh, okay, I can rely on my person that, they saw that there's no tissue and they're going to buy tissue while I sit on this toilet and wait for them. And I can't reach my phone, and I'm not going to get up. Like, I can rely on my person to do that rather than be like, oh, okay, I need to rely on this person to drive me everywhere because I haven't gotten my driver's license because they won't let me, or they won't take me, or these power plays that people do in relationships. So I think there is a different level between that generation and this generation, that these are the expressions. But that's why, I think that was that part of this question of like, when we have like this self and this other, like this is that difference, like those past generations had the others. There was a lot more connection. It was a lot more about relationship and marriage and longevity and all these different things. Once you found your person, it wasn't any of these attachment styles and, labels and stuff. So that dependence and reliance had some level of like purity and almost like, let's say, honor to it, and there was something a little bit more deeply rooted. But for us now, speaking about that, what would you feel the difference between that is in this self, kind of like perfect example, the neoliberal state that we're in, and also that reliance and dependence that you have around others?
What is the difference? I mean, I think what you said, I guess I like, because I wanted to ask you a question. But But I was gonna say, like, I guess that you were kind of describing it as generational, and I'm wondering if, like, well, if those are true states, then they're beyond time. Like we could be embracing those same concepts.
Well, I only said
It's healthy concepts.
generational because you brought up that example of them.
Yes.
You know, when we're you know, these, whoever is listening, you know, these guys out here that are, you know, doing day trading, or they're in crypto, or they're just working a 9 to 5 job, or they're a web developer or whatever, and you are in this relationship, it's like, oh no, I'm not dependent on my girl for that, I'm not dependent on her for that, or I can't rely on her to do that. It's like, you know, there's all these other layers, you know. So those generations didn't necessarily have too many layers. And then you're speaking about a couple that's very idealistic, that have been studying love for 70, 60 years or whatever, you know. So when you bring that down to like normal people that's just out here trying to make a living and trying to be, you know, a motherfucker that's balanced with their masculine and feminine, is like, how does that show up, you know?
Yeah.
And I think for me, just an expression, it's more of the expression of it. Like that generation is an expression, and I think of generations in that way. It's like it is a marker in time, but it's just another generation. Like you're generating something else. You know, these people are generated, these ideologies are generated, these levels of love are generated. All of these things are just generated through time, and time is just a marker, it's a measurement for us. So I think it's less about that, but how can that dependence and reliance like get to where we are, that's so clouded and so misty? How do we get to identify like what the difference is?
Yeah. And I think there's like, I definitely think that there is like, so you got like self-reliance, and then, you know, and then self-dependence. And I think this is like, you know, and I think like everything that we talk about on this show is really about like healthy balance. Because there is real nuance here, because there is like when that's too far on the other side, that's kind of like this hyper independence, like this kind of, I don't need anybody, I'm fine on my own. And I think that's what our culture does really inculcate in people, is that somehow we are to be on our own, and we're supposed to do it all on our own, and we're supposed to be,
Right.
you know. And I think that's incredibly unhealthy at the other end. And then you got the other end, which is like, I can't do anything alone. I don't even know who I am without somebody here, you know. I know so many people like that. I know so many people who have never had any time single, for example. But like that aside, you forget about even relationships, but literally people that won't even go and do something but like go cinema by themselves, or go down the road, or go to the beach by themselves, or whatever like activities where you think, I just want to go and do X, Y, and Z. I'm like, I can't do it because I haven't got somebody with me to, like, there's so many people like this. And that's the other side, which is like a real inability to do anything for self. And then there's somewhere in the middle, which I think what we're talking about is like, when we're thinking about, I suppose, for us and our generation, and like where we've been culturally influenced, I feel like so much of our healing is around being overly hyper independent, overly individualized, overly individual focused. And then we are now having to go into the relational market, for example, and be like, oh, right, how do you start to build relationships in that context? And, you know, yeah, I don't even get me started. I'm not going to go on a tangent, but like, you know, somewhere in the middle, which is like, yeah, like you've cultivated, like you said, you've done that self-work, you've cultivated a sense of self. There is an authentic self. There is stuff that you've looked at. There is, you know, experience to be bared upon. And then also, there is enough capacity, vulnerability, openness, malleability, to be in relation, and be in exchange, and be in connection.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I feel like a key thing that you said right there is, I think it's just like distilled in there, was the capacity, right? And I think that's a big thing for us to do. Like once you have taken that walk, you know, and by taking that walk, it's doing the work, for those of you have not, you know, detached from that yet. But this is the part of it, right? It's like you start to understand this level of self-dependence, and you see your levels of like me being at this excess where I'm just like completely dependent on myself, or I'm like, and I can't depend on myself at all, like, you know, all this stuff. So go to those levels, go to those extremes, find your capacity, and then meet yourself in the middle, you know? That's the self-love, that's the authenticity. And for me personally, and this is just an example that I want to share of like my process, right? And I, you know, I always talk about this unpeeling, and that has been that was the huge step for me. And that was just the process that I took of unpeeling all these different things. But it was really about, as a man, I'm like, okay, how can I increase my ability, you know? And just to share a little bit, like with my solar plexus, right? Like I was led by like different religions, different ways of life, you know, through Eastern practice, through Buddhism, through the Kabbalah, a lot of different ways of like taking little pieces of the truth, right? And this sense of like my solar plexus of like your willpower, and there's so much on that, but this level of self-dependence, like I had that. I'm an only child. When I was born, I was put in an incubator for like couple days. I had that separation from my mom, you know, like my dad wasn't there, so I had that self-soothing. I had that self-regulating of the nervous system, all these different things, this this independence that I had, right? But instead of looking at that as like, oh, like this is all the back stuff of like my childhood, and you know, this is the wounds that I got, it was like, okay, if I'm gonna take this walk into myself, how can I go through it without with the least amount of remnants, you know, with the least amount of disgust? Because like as men, that's what we tend to do. It's like we go through things and then we're like, oh, you should have fucking did that. Oh, you should have known that. Oh, you should have been smarter than you should have been this, you should have been that. And it's like that self narrative, right? So I was like, okay, you know, with all the schooling that I had done and the things that I've learned, it was like, okay, that's not what I want to do. So what do I want to do? And I was like, okay, it makes sense to leverage, right? Let me take what's already in place, my dependence and, you know, self-dependence. And if I'm cultivating this container of self to embody something bigger and create more capacity, then this is what I need to do. Take that level of your own dependence on yourself and leverage that into these things of seeing how you can be more dependent as a person, you know, not dependent on yourself, but be dependent, be the state of it. And that's like, you know, what they speak about in the yogic practices and all these things about being, you know, embodying it, not just, oh, I'm going to be kind, I'm going to go, you know, help this lady cross the road, or I'm going to put an extra dollar in the, you know, GoFundMe or whatever it is that we think that we're doing. It's because we think it's always an action, but that's always outside. So I feel personally, it's this level of self-cultivation for yourself to create that capacity, because then ultimately what that gave me was the ability to do more. And then when I was able to create a sense or a state of ability, it was in essence, because now I'm speaking to a deeper set version of myself, you know, this essence of myself, and then say, okay, now my ability has been, you know, expanded, and this is all about solar plexus. And this was just that work was like, now as a man, I feel more capable, I feel more reliable, I feel more dependable. So now I'm not looking to be those things, whether it be for myself or for others. It's just a state to be in. And then you're consistently emanating that, you know? So in this difference of it, it's like there is a level, like for me personally, I feel like dependence is okay. I can depend on this person in the sense of I'm going to wait. Like, you know, when something, like when you have an email that's pending, or when you're trying to like load something up and, you know, somebody sent you that message and the three dots is like clicking, clicking, clicking. I mean, I'm an Android person, but I know y'all iPhone people got that. But it's like, that's like the pending thing, you know, or when you're that check hit and it's like, oh, it's pending. You can't buy them shoes yet. You know, it's pending. You can't quite hit it yet. So that's like that dependence. When can I wait on this person? Can I like be almost like in this, if you throw something in the air, in that weightless kind of mode, you know, and know that I'm not going to be let down, you know? For me, that's how I look at dependence, you know?
Yeah.
And it deals a lot, with children, with your, if it's with your relationship, I want to show up as like, yeah, if you have that mode of like, I don't know what I'm gonna do, it's like, okay, but if Max has to deal with it, now you have some level of safety to kind of like, regulate that nervous system. That's how I see myself bringing safety to those places and emanating dependence. And then reliability for me has just been like, if I'm going to rely on this person, it's like, when you have a liability, it's like something that's going to be taken from you, but you think of it as like an asset, So when I want to rely on somebody, it's like, can I still do what I'm doing, but know that this safety is back here? Like that person, they got it,
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
if I'm in a relationship or whatever, and I tell my lady, I'm like, hey, I want to cook, some Asian food tonight. I want to do this and that. I'm like, we pillow talking in the morning, right before we get a little crazy. And it's like, yeah, I want to cook this, and the creative juices are flowing. I'm just like, that's my thing, it's just cooking. So it's like, okay, if I tell you that, and then I go cook and I go, grab all the groceries and I put it in there, and then I'm like, oh shit, like I gotta go do something, and I run out. It's like, can I rely on her if I just left? I have that trust in my lady that if I left everything on the kitchen counter, that when I come back, it's not gonna be still just sitting there. Like she gonna be like, oh, like this is perishable. Like let me put this in the fridge. Let me do this. It's like I can still continue on with my life without thinking in the back of my mind that, oh, this liability is there. It's like, nah, my person got it, or like this person got it. It's like, when you got that person that's just gonna pull through, like I could rely on you.
Yeah.
So for me, I try to embody that. And excuse me, let me scratch that. For me, I embody that, as much as I can in every moment that I see and I have the opportunity, and then I just bring in gratitude for being able to see it and all those different things. And I scratch trying, because I feel like that's acting with the intent to fail. But
Do or don't do. Do or don't do, as Yoda would say. But that's really beautiful. I really love that. Yeah, I haven't got, I feel like it's a bit of a mic drop, to be quite honest. I haven't really got anything else to add to that. So yeah, I think that was just very, very beautifully put. Yeah, nicely done.
thank you.
So
That was definitely channeled, because I was
that
like,
was channel. That was
I'm
like, oh,
feeling I'm feeling deep gratitude and appreciation for myself now, because I'm like, actually, yeah, that's exactly what you did. Thank you for doing that.
really nice, really nice. Like beautifully out. Yes.
There we go.
um.
So what
So
else we got?
like next question, right? So let's dive in to
But hold on, before you jump
yes.
to there,
Okay.
because I'm starting to notice like this essence around just even these two questions is
Yeah.
like, and that's why I love like how we intuitively, like, guys, whoever is listening to this, like, we don't, as much as we, I don't know, hopefully we seem like we're organized and we got shit together, but as much as we feel like, this like synergy is just kind of like, maybe some people like put these things together and we have preempted questions and stuff, like we intuitively go on like how these questions like feel, we're like, oh, like, does that feel good? How's that gonna feel? And then we're just like all in the feelings. And then now it's like this essence is kind of coming around of the same presence of how you had that authenticity and that belonging. From that belonging, you have this sense of like security, right? And then in this essence of freedom, you have this sense of like adventure, or like, releasing. But now you have like, I feel like what's been cultivated even just in the first question of authenticity and love, it's like that's that expression of freedom. And then that second one is really about like security and it's like safety. And I feel like this is kind of leaning in the direction of like, with when you're talking about these attachment issues, because you know that I want to poke holes in all of those things, because I feel like those are just more ways of the society to be confused. But yeah, I just wanted to like point that out and just kind of acknowledge that those essences of that security and that essence of that full expression of self is like is in these questions. And if you guys have not asked yourself any of these questions, or some things came up for you, like these questions are always in the description, and yeah, these are like really good like prompt and like journal questions too, to just, bring into your meditation or bring into your relationships or any of your other, relational spaces, or even if you're going on dates. I don't think you should start out with Tinder with this, but maybe like an actual date or something.
Good first date question. Do you think it's possible to be loved and authentic at the same time? Whoa.
They're like, I thought you were an INJF or whatever, fucking attachment issues. See, I keep calling them attachment issues, but attachment style, excuse me. But sorry, let's go. Third question.
Third question. Nice. Do I feel able to embrace more parts of myself, particularly my shadow?
You want me to answer that or you answer that?
I don't know. I'm sort of tempted to die. Go on.
Yeah, because I'm the shadow man. So I want to hear what you gotta say. I want to hear what you gotta say.
Yeah, I think
you're wearing my color right now too.
I know. We're twinning today, man. We're twinning today. You brought the label. You brought yeah. I don't know where this is from, but anyway. Do I feel able to embrace more parts of myself, particularly my shadow? I feel definitely able to embrace more parts of myself. I think you were kind of talking about this earlier, and I think this happens like as you get older anyway, because I think as you get older, you've kind of had these different expressions of yourself. I feel like we've gone through sort of almost different images where you've tried on different identities. And then there's a point where you sort of go, oh God, it's all just like, these are just masks. I'm going to just take all of this off. But then there's still those little bits of those identities that are still within, because there's a seed to that. There's a seed of that expression. So I definitely feel like that, like where I'm like, oh, like all the little children coming home, like all the little parts of me that are like, oh, that sort of makes me like this whole. And I definitely would say, like, obviously yoga's absolutely helped me like really, really tune into like my core self. And then like shadow. Now, I guess I am always really, really, well, you know me, I'm always cautious, I'm always humble. I've done a lot of shadow work. So I have a lot of awareness around my shadow, but the whole point of a shadow is that it's something that you find difficult to look at and see in yourself. Like it's not easy to see, i.e. like it's hidden from you, or it's something you don't want to see, or something you find difficult to look at. And so I think I'm always cautious that like, and when I say I've embraced my shadow, I mean, I guess, and I think this is where I feel like we see it slightly differently, because I feel like you have such a like concept of your shadow, like he's like, is part of the council, like your shadow's part of the council, like, you know what I mean?
That's my guy.
That's your guy. You just put him out every now and again when it's time to like fling fire. So anyway,
like, yo, pull up.
Yeah.
Pull up.
Time for shadow to take the lead on this one.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess I don't necessarily see my shadow like that. I see my shadow as like hidden parts of myself that are yet to come to the fore. And I feel like I've definitely done a lot of work and I have a lot of awareness, but I'm always aware that like there's more to be done, there's more to see. So I don't ever feel like that shadow work is done. I think it's a process, and at different times in our lives it feels like more necessary. But yeah, and I think that there's something, you know, when we're talking about I've forgotten to feed my cat. I'm just looking at the time and she's thinking, what the hell is going on? Why have I not fed her?
Oh Lord.
I know, sorry. I'm sorry, Cece. I'll be soon. So yeah, I think that there's something what you said about the intuition around these questions. I think it's really beautiful, because it is like, when we're talking about authenticity, you're talking about all aspects of yourself. Like that's all of the, you know, the whole count, right? That's the whole self. And I do think what you said about self-love, like you've got to be able to accept those parts of yourself. You know, because then you start to recognize when you're in relation and there's parts of those, oh, like I said, like some people will be like, I like that bit, but I don't like that bit, like leave that bit behind. Or, oh, I like this bit of you, but I don't like that, so leave that bit behind, or whatever. And like people want to pick bits of you. But when you've embraced that yourself, like when you've embraced all of your aspects of self, then I do think that that gives you a better standing when you're coming into relationships, to be knowing that, like, well, no, actually, if you want that, that's coming with as well, because that's part of the whole self, right? Which doesn't mean to say that we play to the shadow. We're like, yeah, shadow, come through, like, obviously. But I do think that, like, and I think, you know, this is what we've talked about in previous episodes as well, is that the shadow really shows up in the relational space, because that's when you have the mirror. Like, shadow work is very difficult to do, I believe, without some kind of mirror. Like, I don't even know how you would go about doing shadow work without some kind of mirror, be that a therapist, be that a relationship, be that previous experiences, where you can see, oh, in that situation, that part of me showed up, or I expressed that side of myself, or whatever. And then you can see, right, it, like, I just think that it's really helpful and useful to have that. So, and it's like there's this dance between like being in the relational space that shows this stuff up for us, and then also I want to say like a safe container, like safe spaces. I want to say a safe space, like a place where all of you is embraced, where you can move through that stuff, you know, and like you say, have all of that accepted. Yeah.
I'm so excited to answer this question.
I can tell.
This was like one of my favorite questions, just in this little bit, because you know we have a plethora. Yeah, that is a very interesting perspective. Like, especially how you just went through all of that with so much grace of embracing those parts. And like, again, I feel like that is more of like that feminine aspect, right? And I feel that within myself as well. And I think this is the part, like, yes, you know, you hear me talk about like, yeah, shadow, like pull up, like, you know, that's my guy, like all of that. But that's just that's him there, right? But it's also because of that grace and because of that acceptance and because of that appreciation and all of those different ways of me as a man coming from that extreme masculinity and that ego and that shadow, and just living in that identity, and coming back embracing that feminine aspect and saying like, okay, instead of being like, yo, you fucked up, you took me through all of these years and you did all of this, like, you seen what you just did? Nah, like, you sit down, you know, ego death, you must die. Like, it was never that, you know. I never wanted to shame or guilt or blame him at all. You know, it was like, in the way you spoke about, like, you know, the different masks, for me it was like different outfits, like different clothes, you know. And these were the different outfits that you were putting on. It's like, oh, I'm this character, oh, I'm this character, oh, I'm that character, oh, I'm this character. And even him, like, his name is Sebastian, you know, like he was that guy, you know, and this is how he showed up. But now it's like, as embracing that part of myself, it is embracing the whole council. So when I pull up, like, all of us, we showing up at the same time. It's gang, like, it's all of us. What's up? You know? But that's the part. And I think the power comes in with the masculinity and saying that, yes, this feminine, right? And I truly believe that this is true for me. This is just my truth, is that, you know, my body is of the earth, you know, and that the feminine created, but there's this masculine energy that needs to explain. You know, the feminine is the what, the masculine is the how, you know. And then there was this balance, and like you said, this dance between the two. So in embracing, you know, all of those different parts, I had to, one, consciously do that, two, cognitively do that, three, emotionally do it, and then physically do it. So it's this same representation of, like, you know, the everything about science, right? And it was another tool in like physics and psychology and all of these tools that I kind of just used to kind of like feel my way through the shadow. you know, and this is the part of like the way that I approach shadow work. And it's something that I work through with myself, that I also work through with my clients, is saying like, you don't have to, like, I feel like I was doing it through relations, but it's also like that's when we hurt people, you know. And it's like hurt people. So especially as a man, I didn't want to keep taking that on in the relational space, because it was always romantic relationships. I was like, no, you need to do this like your fucking self. So you need to figure out how you can find your shadow in the dark by yourself without a mirror. And it was like, we about to do what? So what came with that, it was like, it was in, you know, developing these different tools. Like, okay, Max, if you're sitting here, you know, and this was basically like the meditation, right? And you had all these clothes on and you're cleaning out your closet now, but the lights are completely off. You're not looking at any other mirrors. You're not reflecting your light from, because that's really like what shadow work is like an absence of the light, you know, and you're going into the dark. And I had to release that fear and do all these things. But to do that without a person, without another like physical mirror, yeah, it's difficult. But then you have to step into the metaphysical. And if you're not able to like expand your mind and expand your being into that sense, then yeah, it's going to be a little bit difficult, and you're going to have to keep learning your lessons in the physical realm. So like for me, it was like the situation like with the clothes, right? I was like, okay, if these have been characters that I've been playing, and I just been, you know, I know that this world is a stage and da 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 and all that other bull crap, right? All the noise. I'm pushing all that out. And it was like, okay, if you're cleaning out your closet and you're changing these clothes, you need to just stop putting clothes on. And what that meant was be vulnerable. And that was the embracing of that part, just for me as a man, was like, wow, you never actually, like, you were afraid to just be naked, like butt ass naked. And then that brought up so much too. It was like, I remember times where, you know, not to get too personal, but, you know, I would be in these physical, sensual, sensationally, fantastically climaxed situations, and like I would still have my socks on, or like I would quickly put my drawers on, or like something, you know. And it's like, even those physical ways of that correspondence of what is reflected on the inside is what is reflected on the outside, we're still not necessarily fully comfortable being completely naked, basically, you know, taking off all the clothes. But ever since going into that shadow and embracing that shadow, it was like, oh, I can show up like this, because like I've been naked before. Now when I put on these clothes, or when I put on whatever, this is who I am, you know, because at the end of the day, I'm naked inside, and I can show up and I can be raw. I can be naked. I can be exposed and not have a fear of that shadow or of that mirror coming up, and be looking at myself and being like, oh, like, you know. And I feel like that is the shadow work. So many of us, we approach a mirror and we're unable to be vulnerable and unable to be naked in that sense, because we're looking at a version of ourselves, and then we're looking at the judgment, the doubt, the shame, all of these different things, you know. And I think that has been a key point that has come up just with like previous clients as well, you know, with like body shaming and feeling insecure. And then these are where the attachments kind of come in, you know. And this is something that I want to spin too, is like, if you are listening to this, and whether you be a man, female, whatever you identify as, and you have this polarity, and you have this sense of a attachment style, there also has to be detachment styles. And this whole process that I kind of explained was the detachment style, because it's, yes, you can embrace that part of yourself, but you need to be affected by that. And affected, I mean, by like internally, you know. And that's that part of yourself, like giving yourself that freedom, giving yourself that security, giving yourself that permission to be authentic, to give yourself that permission to belong, you know. And less about the effects, because the effects are the things that happen outside. That's how we get attached to somebody, you know. And when we take that tool of the identify, we take that tool to identify our attachment style, it's just a tool to leverage. And once we can let that tool go, we say, oh, okay, now I'm detached from this thing that I was. We don't take the tool and nudge it in and be like, oh, that's what I am. Attachment style. You don't hook yourself in deeper. You hook it in, leverage it out, and then you can detach from it and say, oh, thank you for showing me that that's what I was. This is how I'm treating you, and boom, now you're separate from me. And this is that way. I mean, this is a way that you can utilize those things to start to understand this way of detaching from these things. But it's really just you embracing these other parts of yourself. And this is the part of the shadow, right? It's that part that you can't see. But now for me, like, the shadow guy, like, I love that, because when I show up, I know that, like, that gives me affirmation and like consistent rooting and like grounding as a man, and like as a tether that I'm able to orient myself, kind of like, when you like, what are back in the days when they had the sundial, right? It's like you have this thing in the middle, and because the sun is there and the light is there, that where that shadow is, that's how you tell the time, like that's how you can be precise. That's how you can orient yourself in this world and navigate relationships.
Mm. Yeah, it's funny. As you were talking.
Sorry, I was just so excited about
No,
that
was
question.
awesome.
I was like, oh,
Love
I
it,
love
love it,
that.
love it. Love it. No, beautifully put. And like but as you were talking, it's so funny that you talk about the sundial, because I was thinking that, like, ultimately that's kind of how I imagine it, like visually, is like there's a light, and that's usually the front facing. That's usually the bit that we're kind of like quite happy to share, quite happy to show, or it's the seen parts of ourselves. You know what I mean? That's kind of like everything that you can see, and I kind of imagine it as like a light, well, like this behind me, you can see
Right.
that's the light, right? But then there's something behind it, and behind it, that's the shadow, right? That's the kind of, maybe you want to say, like, all the astrologers out there, like, what is that, moon sign? Or is that your moon? Like, what, I don't know, like you have your sun sign and then the moon sign, right? You have the other side, the bit that
Right, the unconscious,
or the bits that people don't see, or that you don't show, or you know what I mean. But it's really interesting that you're talking about doing that by yourself, and by using almost like using your knowledge of your proximity in space, like to learn that part, like, you know what I mean, to kind of be aware of that. And then also what you were saying about, yeah, like, absolutely, like shedding off like the clothes, the identity, like just taking that off, and then
butt ass naked,
just finding that raw essence. Yeah.
Facts.
Yeah, it makes me think about like when practices, obviously teaching yoga, like men do come to yoga sometimes. It's quite rare, but like you do get men in yoga. And it's so funny, like I can't even tell you, like, it's got to be like a high percentage of men who come to yoga and refuse to take off their socks in the space. Like they just literally refuse. But I thought it was funny that you were talking about that. And then wonder if it is something about just kind of keeping something to yourself, like something like just not really wanting to expose. But like, I don't know, there must be something about like,
Well, let's go into the science of that, right? Because that makes a lot of sense. And for me, like I said, like science was the tool, and like this was the thing that gave me the answer. And then after that, I was like, oh, actually, everybody compliments your nice feet, so keep your socks off.
I was
never really.
I was about to say you've got nice feet, so what's the
Yeah, I never really had like a huge issue with that. It would just be like a thing to do, or like that was just a thing that I didn't take off. But it's this thing, right? Like, think about, like these deep-seated things that we're talking about, from this deep essence of freedom and belonging, right? When we're talking about something deep set and like primal and innate within us, go back to that space, right? And whether you believe we're a caveman or whatever the hell you believe, we were born naked, right? But then what's the first thing we did? We started to clothe ourselves for safety. We started to shelter ourselves for safety. So it's like all of these things. And now as you progress through the generations and through the time, it's still the same thing, but a loincloth is just showing up as socks, And also, yeah, it can be like men are just, oh, I think my feet are weird, or I don't know, I don't cut my toenails, or I don't know. It could be some little superficial bullshit like that, but that's like the person's personal stuff, But where does that come from? It's that sense of, yes, it's a root, like our chakra, our root chakra is all about safety. It's about grounding. It's about security. What's the last thing on our body? Our feet, Remember that I don't feel safe. I don't feel secure. So it's these little things. And It's those universal laws, you know, of correspondence. Let me look at myself and see what's happening. Really look at it, not just be like, oh yeah, it's something that I do. Look at it, pay some attention to it, and like we said, you know, like analyze it, not like critically, but analyze it, look at it, give it a little bit more attention, and say, oh wow, like this is actually happening. And that's what I feel like meditation was mainly about. You know, it's taking these little things and then looking at them, you know, like again, like taking off that pedal and just looking at it and being like, wow, 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 analyzing each aspect, giving it some time, appreciating its essence, and then being like, I don't want that. You know, or like, I'm going to keep that and put that back, you know. But yeah, I think for a lot of men that's a big thing. And I think for that, it allows men, well, not allows, it kind of pushes us into this space of creating boundaries, and not necessarily boundaries outside, but boundaries within, you know. And we start to create, and because yes, we're creators, yes, we're all kings in our heart, but you know, if we don't necessarily identify with that, and we identify with all the things outside, those boundaries that are inside are going to be created as walls outside. So yeah, you're building walls, you're building this kingdom, but you're just building like a little prison, which ultimately doesn't give you that freedom. And then not having that freedom, that king doesn't feel like he's belonging. So these two things are still at an imbalance in the depths. So that's why for me it was like this, if you can love yourself and because when you're looking at those little petals and you're going through that depth, you're really just giving attention to yourself. And that is what self-love is, you know. It's how much do I pay attention, and if I'm doing that for myself or I'm doing that for another, how much do I pay attention to my lady's moon cycle, or what type of, like, you know, hair gel she uses, or what color she likes, or you know, that she goes to yoga every Thursday. Maybe I want to go. It's like those little things of attention. And I think that's something that a lot of men need to cultivate a lot more, which is, you know, why I'm doing the retreats that I'm doing, why I'm having the talks that I'm doing with these men, and making the connections that I am, because it's that part of exactly what we talk about here. And, you know, in the MF podcast, it's not only just like me as the masculine, you as the feminine, but that quadrant that we spoke about, and how do we get in touch with that. And for me as a man, I've come to understand that you don't necessarily have to go to yoga, or you know, I don't know what men think women do, like wash dishes and cook and paint and, I don't know, breathe or play a guitar. I don't know. Like men have
dance under the moon in a circle around a fire.
Yeah, exactly. Like, no, talk to the moon, do some moon ceremonies, do some witchy shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, get in tune with it. Like, if you love the moon and you love that unconscious side, love it. Love it by like paying attention to it. Because that is the most valuable thing that you can give, just as a person, but especially as a man, is like, give your attention to it. Whatever we put our attention to, like, that's what we do. We like create, you know? So why not do that to your feminine side as well, and create that understanding, you know, and create that relationship, because ultimately that's loving that other part of yourself. And just be naked under the moon too.
Don't get naked.
Shit, I've done. Listen, guys, if you're hearing this is what Costa Rica will do to you. I mean, I'm not in Costa Rica right now, but that was definitely me. It was full moon, raining, in the jungle. I'm butt ass naked, just under the rain. Like, yeah, this is real. This is it. Tarzan ain't got nothing on me.
Nothing else, like nothing else to hide. Like, just that is it, raw, naked,
Nothing.
real. Like, just
that's
it.
Every single last element that you could think of was right there in that moment. And I can tell you, just as a man, in my utmost pure state of security and comfort, that shit was liberating. And I've never felt more free and more belonged in my fucking life. So yeah, there it is. There it is. Just letting it all hang out, quite literally.
Yeah, literally. I mean, but then, like, you know, like, I always feel like you go carry stuff if you don't it is liberating, because there's nothing you have to
Mm-hmm.
worry about, because everything is there. It's all there. Nothing is hidden. Nothing is, you're not ashamed. There's no shame. There's just the rawness, isness of your whole being. And it is just,
Mm-hmm.
particularly in front of, like, well, the picture that you've painted, I'm like, this bare-chested man like singing up towards the moon in the rain, and it's dark. I like, but there is something about that, like being witnessed by nature, because in nature, that is when we are like fully like accepted, outside of,
Mm-hmm.
you know, just talking about relationships where, you know, the complications of people and dynamics, but outside of that, in nature, there's just pure witness, pure essence. And like you said, like it's liberating, because there is no facade. There's no, which face am I putting on today? Like, which I have to, like, I'm speaking to this person, I have to be like this, or they need to think that I'm strong, or they need to think that I'm nice, or they need to think that I'm like, or whatever, like all the internal narrative, like how we're showing up in spaces. And like, when you can just, like you say, just, there's nothing else. Yeah, exactly. Then you don't have to worry about that. You can just, that's a load shed off your shoulders straight away.
It's everything. Everything is shut off.
Yeah.
Everything. Like, you're not thinking about, oh, my socks are gonna get wet. Oh, my shirt is like, it's never gonna dry. Like,
Yeah.
little things like that. We really create those boundaries within our mind, within our body. With, like, what sense does that make? Like, oh, I don't want to go out in the rain. My shirt's gonna get wet, or like my socks. So it's never gonna dry. It's gonna be wet forever, and you're gonna have to wear that outfit forever. Like, what? Some of the things that we come up with as humans just to like stop ourselves from freedom is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But
Are you nicely segueing into the like final question? Because I was like, you're so good at
I
that.
am actually, yeah.
That's a nice little segue. Go on, run with it.
So how do you love within boundaries?
Mm. Mm. See, when I hear that, I hear, how do I love within limits? I guess that's kind of how.
Ooh, wow. That's nice. I like that. Keep going with that. I want to hear that.
Um,
Oh, boundaries is limits. Yeah, let's do it. Juicy. Sink your teeth in.
um, because I guess when I think about the limits, I think about how fallible we are. I think about life situations that just, you know, whatever they may be, that disconnect us or separate us or distance us from love. And I'm here using the word love as in the universal sense of love, and I'll come on to like love relationships in a moment. But there is like that, I think, that happens at an individual level, where the limitations, like I would say, like our human selves, like our humanness, to some extent limits us, because within our humanness, like, yeah, we're so, like I say, fallible. We have like so many weak spots and our strengths, obviously, but I feel like that, how do we love within that? How do we love within these limits? How do we love when, you know,
Whoa, don't go changing it now. Don't go changing it to how we love in the limits. How do we love in the boundaries?
how do we love in the boundaries? Yeah, and I mean, I guess that's, yeah, and it's I feel like it's just keep coming back to the center, keep coming back to that space, keep coming back to love as a universal principle. Like, I always feel like,
Even if you have boundaries.
when you say boundaries, I guess what you mean is like, you mean boundaries, internal boundaries.
However you mean it. Because you said limit, so that's where I hear this coming up.
Yeah, and it kind of is a misnomer, because love has no limits. Obviously, there is no limits to love. There is no boundaries when it comes to love. There's boundless, right?
Right, which is why I wanted to hear how you were just gonna create this contradiction, like loving within limits. That sounds movie or something.
Well, I guess that's why I made it into universal love, because I'm like, well, before we get into like relationships, because there is no limits, and the only limits is our inability to see or perceive or receive or connect to the boundlessness of universal love. And I think that
But that sounds like all the places we can put boundaries at.
How do you mean?
In all of those ways that you said that universal love can be limited, I feel like those are all spaces that we create boundaries within.
Yeah, I don't think universal love itself is limited. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying like how we perceive ourselves and the world and people, then that's where we find the limitations. And I don't think I think ultimately love is a boundless, it's
right, of course.
boundless and
But how do
universal,
you
right?
love within that?
Within limits. And I guess coming back to my point, I feels like this question is saying, how do you love within all of the messiness of humanness? Like how does that pure highest essence of love, that universal one love, how does that come into this human body and express itself in the relational space and maintain its levity? And that's what I feel like, that's how I interpret this question. And I feel like that's kind of what we're always trying to get to. It's like, well, how do we keep that essence of that highest expression of love when we are knee deep in this human messiness?
I love that, because that fully supports exactly what I'm about to say. And I hope that it makes me sound a lot less arrogant than I'm going to sound. Just simply deny that you're human. Don't be human. Fuck that. Like, I don't personally believe that I'm human. And that allows me to be boundless. And like, I am fully connected to this boundless love. Like 100% at all times. I'm just like, oh, I just know it. So no, I'm not, I'm not finite. I'm infinite, infinite. Absolutely. I know that like time doesn't exist. And even if it's a lie, I've told myself it so many times. That's my belief. That's my chronic thought. So it's my belief. And it's like, but in all seriousness now, it's like, that's the part, right? It's like, this question really came to me like very simply. It was like, okay, how do I love within boundaries? If I see myself as a human, because I personally don't believe that unconditional love is attainable. Like, I don't care. I mean, excuse me if any of you are mothers, maybe I'm losing you here, but that's fine. You already listened to the whole podcast, so we're here. I don't believe that mothers are unconditional loving. I don't think that elders are. I don't think your grandmother is. I don't think a deer is. No, I think everything is conditioned because we are finite. We're here in the material world, and that in and of itself is a condition.
Just interject quickly, just to say, I've heard a saying, and I think it's quite a nice saying, which is that love is unconditional, but relationships aren't. So you can still love someone and have conditions on the engagement of that, or the relational space, for example. So I think that. But yeah. So anyway, sorry.
Yeah, it's a prettier way of saying what I just said, but yeah, either way. But that was like the stepping stone, because that was already there, like placed in me. I was like, oh, like humans, and I say that I know this because I've contacted it before. It was like during plant medicine, during deep meditations, you feel this sense of pure bliss, pure unconditional love. Like there is just it's not, I don't even personally feel like it was love. It was just this, and it was just like, it was a mixture of like bliss, love, acceptance, and peace, and like harmony, and just all of it together. Whatever that thing is, like, that's what it is. Like, it's under no condition. So when this question presented, like when it was presented, I was like, oh, then really the question is like, how do you as a human, you know? Like, how does love look like in you? And when I asked myself that, I was like, oh, because I am the boundary. I see myself when I put myself in this position and I'm taking this individualized perspective. I know that I try to hold no bounds, you know, I try to hide no boundaries, you know. I've come to a place where I've grown so much, where I've taken down those walls, taken down the artillery, you know, I've, you know, buried all my guns. I've cleared out my minefields, you know, I've ripped up all the weeds. Like, I've done a whole renovation, you know. There's been times where, yes, you know, my trusting has been way too much. Let me not say too much. It's just been the level of discernment that I had for what the trust needed to be at that moment in time wasn't balanced. So then I practiced more discernment. I didn't become less trusting because so many people stole from me, or, you know, because this person lied to me. Because then when I become less trusting, then you're putting up a boundary. Then when you meet the next person, you're holding that boundary against them. So you're holding all these expectations, blah, blah. So what I learned to do was, okay, if you have this, if you are in governing this piece of land, right? And I see myself as a world, as a body, and as a universe, create the space around you. Okay. And yes, you have these doors, you have these tools of discernment and how to exercise these things of trust, how to know and observe and utilize your sight and your higher faculties to determine and discern, like, who comes close, who deserves this much trust, who deserves all your trust. Now you let them in. So there's like gates, you know, or fences or whatever you may see. For me, it's like an energetic bubble. You know, how much energy am I going to give you? How am I using my discernment that I allow my spirit to speak to me? So that is the way that I allow love within this boundary, you know. And the way that I do that is not by lying to myself and being like, oh, you're boundless, and just be all out there. And like, love is, you know, everything, it's infinite. It's just flowing through everything. This table is love. It's like, no, actually the table's hard. If you hit your head on it, you're not going to love it, you know? So what it was like, take this boundary of your human self and how can you expand that? How can you create that ability to be expanded more? And then that is when I was like, oh, okay, use your energy, use your aura, use your words, use these things that can widen, in a metaphysical sense, this piece of land in this body, and how can I express, you know, and extend that out. And that for me is exactly what we've been speaking about, is it's allowing this finite person to belong and to feel secure in it, but also allowing it to express freely, you know, at the same time, and maintain that balance. And with that, I think we don't have to personally think about loving, you know, in that way, or loving within boundaries, or loving this person, or love it. Love is going to flow naturally. It's a consistent river that's flowing through you. It's just a matter of, like you said, with when we're giving or receiving, or if we're accepting or seeing or connecting or whatever, that light is always there. It's that, can we look into the shadow? Can we look into the light and then receive it and allow it to flow through us, because we stay aligned. And now that channel is running and flowing freely and authentically, you know. And for me, that's why I love that this question was like the last portion of it, because that tied up like what really freedom and belonging really truly is. You know, it's the freedom that comes in with this boundaried body, and this belonging that we tell ourselves that we need to belong, or we don't belong, or that we're not free, or, you know, that we're not expressing ourselves authentically. We remove those knots, and then we just fully align, and then that love just flows. You don't have to worry about loving another person in a relationship, or loving yourself. You just need to do the things to take off all the ways that you bounded yourself to become boundless.
And that you said, oh, mic drop. But that's just like literally, that's that Rumi quote, right? You do not need to seek for love. You need to find all the walls inside of yourself that you've built against love. Because once you take those walls away, then all there is love, because love is everything and it's all around. And it's like the only limits that we place on ourselves, or the limits we see in ourselves. And you're right, like that's absolutely beautiful. I love that you said that. Like, that was beautiful. Like, you know, that we because love is this expansive energy, and because of our humanness, there's almost that contrast, but we pull love in from source, and then that is what allows us to expand and grow and become more of ourselves, more less human.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess. Yeah.
That is fully it.
And the grander, bigger, yeah.
In the rounder, bigger scheme of things.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's the part of when I say it, and I think a lot of people hear the arrogance in it when you say that you're not human or whatever. It's just like, no, because I don't identify as that. Like, yeah, I'm here, I see it, I identify it. Like, I identify that I'm an insecure attached, or that I have ADHD or whatever the case is, but I'm not that.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing you deal with addiction and depression and all these other things. It's like, how do you free yourself from telling yourself that I'm identifying with this thing? I am not anger. I'm not these things. I am purely. And when you come to that love comes through, and then you fill in that blank that's in that sentence, which is, I am love. Period.
Yes. And we all are love, all of us. We just need to, like you say, when you say you know yourself, like, really knowing yourself is like about removing those barriers, it's not about becoming something, when I think about like yoga again. But yeah, like, like I always say it's about peeling away. It's not about becoming something. I'm becoming this thing that I want to become, or this in my mind's eye, but actually I'm removing like all of these barriers, these internal concepts, ideas, barriers, whatever that's limiting me. And then actually then that essence of love can pour in, and then you start to know that's who you are. It's not even who, like, it's just, that's it. That's all that exists. You peel it all
that's
away.
what it is. Yeah. And I feel like just kind of like a last touch on that is, I think for a lot of guys that are, whether they be listening to this and they want to take me up on going into the jungle and being naked and being under a full moon, whatever, maybe you don't have to go that far, but it's also like, maybe if you're looking to get in a sense of like tuning into this feminine aspect of you, it's really looking at the feminine in the bounds that we put it in, as we think of feminine, and then we think of the closest thing to relate to that as a female. And then we say, oh, it's this. And like, let me look at a female, see all the things that she does. That's feminine. It's like, no, that's a female. That's an embodiment of feminine energy, and that's her nature. What does it look like in you? And like, for me personally, it came to the sense of like, what is our bodies, right? And when you look at all of our senses, right, when we're speaking, we're auditorily, we're putting things out. That is more of like a masculine thing. We're exerting, it's, you can think of erection, you can think of everything externalized. It's all the external energy. We do things in the physical, blah, 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 right? The feminine aspect of you is how you receive. Like, can men actually listen? Can men actually receive? When you ask a question, shut the hell up and listen. This what the meditation is about, and I think this is one of the key things about the freedom and the belonging, in the sense of our authenticity, is like, when you're externalized, some men, we have this concept of identifying with all these things that are outside. It's like, oh, what do you do? What do you do for work? What do you do for your like hobby? Like, do you go to the gym? Do all these doing? How do you receive? And in that way, it's like, that's the part where we can kind of tap into that feminine side, which is the closest thing to love, and it's absolutely the highest expression, and women are, closer to that essence. So us denying that and putting a bound to say, oh, like, I'm not feminine, I'm not soft, I'm not this, I'm not, it's like, you've created this image of what the feminine is, and then you've placed that in yourself to create the bounds, and you've kind of bound and oppressed the feminine inside of you, so that you can be more masculine and step into that, to give yourself this false sense of freedom and security and authenticity, to validate that masculine side, and yeah, I think a lot of that comes from unbinding her, and figuring it out and receiving her in that way. I think that's key steps that men need to be taking now to start to become free and to start to actually realize that they do belong, you know, rather than telling themselves that they belong to this football team or this company or whatever it may be. But yeah, I think that's the last little tidbit I wanted to send to the guys out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's nice wrapped in, because you kind of started talking about the patriarchy, and how patriarchy is quite clearly oppressive for women, but it's also oppressive for men. You know, like there is a part of oneself, or part of the self, that has to be denied in order to be the patriarchal male. It requires a denial of aspects of self. And you know, that saying that Mandela saying, you know, the oppressor oppresses themselves as well as the oppressed, because there has to be a part of you that is in denial. There has to, if who we truly are is love, then there has to be a part of you that is being denied, that's being shut off, when you have the capacity to oppress another. And in so doing, you're oppressing yourself. So yeah, even though men get more privileges and benefits, but that's another episode for another time. Why do men still want to be the patriarchal male? Like, why might that be? All right, they oppress themselves, but there's some other benefits to it. So, you know, I don't know how you just all those benefits and then say, actually, but what you get is a whole self. Yeah.
No comment.
Good luck selling that to the anyway. not me being cynical. All right, maybe that's a good place to to wrap things up. Are we not going to do a dilemma today? Are we not going to do a dilemma? I think we're running out of time.
I mean, I personally feel like that was the dilemma there, you know. I think we kind of went through all of that with, you know, our actual attachments to our roots within freedom and security, and how to, you know, dismantle that sense of, you know, these labels and being the anxious, avoidant, and da 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 da, and INBTQGFs and H's and whatever, you know. And I think a lot of the dilemmas, whether it be masculine or feminine, I think just as humans, this is kind of what we're going through, you know. And I feel like we touched on all of these dilemmas that, you know, if you are experiencing or have noticed or identified, whether if it's in the relational space or within yourself, again, like, yes, these are like obviously like experiences. Like, I definitely expressed a bunch of experiences that I went through and processes that I've utilized to get to where I am, to not only unfurl that, but also give myself that direction so that you can still continuously move forward and not just like keep being in that pattern, you know. Because we deeply have this innate need and this primal need for that freedom and belonging, but we ultimately have to go find it first and really truly like what it means, you know. And utilizing the light or the flashlight of authenticity and using the orient of security can help with that, you know. And I think it's, again, like, everybody has to take their own walk, but even if you're listening to this now, it's more about taking that walk, but with these tools, you know, because something led you to listen to this, and these are just the tools, you know. These are just two other aspects of yourself sharing their experiences of this love being expressed into this world, and the ways that we found freedom and found belonging in the masculine and the feminine, so that we could be the motherfuckers we are today. Yeah.
All right. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. Yeah, beautifully said. I have nothing else to add. So just needless to say, just want to say thank you for watching. Continue to stay tuned, and you can check out any of our past episodes in the file in the bank. So yeah, check out some past episodes, because I know we referred to quite a lot in this episode. So yeah, we're building a little archive here, and yeah, and this beautiful conversation that continues. So we'll see you again next time. Thank you so much. And thank you, Max.
Absolutely.
Peace.
If you like this episode, please support the podcast and the channel by subscribing, liking, sharing, or donating. You will also find all of the show notes and questions in the description, along with important links and contact details. We look forward to seeing you next time here with us on this MF Quadrant.